And we're back. Welcome everyone to another Reedsy Live, Reedsy's ongoing series of webinars where we bring on professionals from the world of publishing to show you how to write and publish better books. Today, if you don't know, it's going to be a big old genre one. We've brought on an award-winning sci-fi, fantasy, and also horror editor who's going to be talking to you about what it's like in the big old world of publishing for genre writers. We're going to be mostly focusing on science fiction and fantasy, but we're going to have a bit of an open format here. So if you do have any horror questions, do toss them out. Oh, hi, Lita. I'm reading the comments just now. For those of you who have turned up early, thank you very much for joining. I've had a lot of feedback over the last few months from different sorts of writers, and we have realised that we have somewhat neglected some of our genre writers here, mostly because with any sort of niche, we're always going to get fewer people turning up, and I'm mostly a man of vanity, and I love seeing loads of people here. But however, it's a good opportunity for us to drill down into specific aspects of publishing and really help you see what the landscape is, within your chosen field. For those of you who are here already, why not do me a favor and give this thing a like? If you haven't already, please subscribe to Reedsy's YouTube channel. We put out new videos twice a week, and we have these webinars every other week. If you're subscribed, you'll get a notification whenever we start. So, huzzah! While we're waiting, why don't you let us know where you're coming from? We have Susan from Orlando, Florida. Daniel Holland, maybe not from Holland. Becca, however, is from Holland, from Amsterdam. Emily from Texas. Welcome, everyone. We'll repeat this as soon as we hit 8 o'clock here in my time, 3 p.m. on the East Coast. But what this is going to be is a little bit of a change from our regular Reedsy live formats. It's going to be a bit of a conversation between myself and John, the editor guest who's on with us today. We're going to talk broadly about publishing, sci-fi and fantasy, and then we're going to try open up the discussion to the Q&A. So if you haven't already, log into YouTube and you'll be able to comment and send questions. I'll be trying to get your questions answered as much as I can. Thank you, Scott Davison, liked and subscribed. You're a good man. Stephanie from Ottawa, Ontario. Hey, welcome. Carolyn from Amsterdam. Well, a lot of people from the Netherlands here today. So, hoe gaat het met jou? Carl from New Zealand, welcome. Healing Music from India. Wilder Bellamy, New Jersey, exit 8. Wilder, a regular guest here. Well, it's going to be a couple of minutes, but if you've just joined today, we're going to have a bit of a discussion with a science fiction and fantasy editor to talk about the publishing landscape for genre authors. We've got a lot of great questions already at the top of this, but as the talk progresses, we're going to be asking you for your questions. We're going to try to go through as many of them as we can and give you a good, broad overview of the publishing landscape. Of course, myself and John are based here in the UK, so there's a chance that what we talk about is specific probably to the UK, but I imagine there aren't huge differences in the way things are run on both sides of the Atlantic, and I'm sure John will let you know when his area of expertise hits its outer limits. Master Blackthorn likes and subscribe from California. Also good for you. Phil Davidson from Littlehampton, UK. We've got Susan from Washington, US, from the West Coast, so Washington State. We've got Carleen from Melbourne. Welcome. So many people. It's good to see so many new faces and old. But if you haven't already, please like and subscribe. Every little like helps, and every subscribe really helps. Ulkesh from Southampton in the UK. It's been a big-ish week for us here in the United Kingdom. We've not been confined to our houses anymore. We can go outside and meet up to 6 people from 2 households, which is lovely. Sandy from Ireland, welcome. Hannah Joy from London, UK, a sci-fi web comic maker, fantastic. We have Ian from Minnesota, Casey Wade from St. Louis, KC, not KC, St. Louis. We have JB from Irvine, California, fantastic, so many people. Okay, well, we're hitting 8 o'clock here in the UK, which is 3 p.m. over on the East Coast, 12 noon on Pacific, I think half past midnight in India, 3 a.m. in Singapore, 6 a.m. in Sydney. We're going to get a start on, but before I bring on my guest, just a little bit of housekeeping. For those of you just tuning in, the format of this is going to be a little different. Instead of there being a presentation followed by a Q&A, I'm going to be live on here having a bit of a discussion with our guest John, talking about the publishing landscape. And as soon as we can, we're going to open up the floor to you guys for your questions, and we're going to try cover as much ground as we can and answer as many of your questions as we can. So hopefully, you know everything you need to know. I'm getting some love for the Bell and Sebastian T-shirt. This is, I think, my nice formal T-shirt. I've got a lot of really ratty ones. This one I picked up at a concert a couple of years ago, and it's managed to keep its shape, which is always nice. You know, when you're in front of an audience, you want to look your best in casual adjusted terms. Okay, great. Well, enough of me blathering entirely. I'm going to bring on our guest. Please welcome John Oliver. Jonathan, how you doing?
Hello. Yes, I'm good, thanks.
Yeah, you are also in the UK. Whereabouts are you?
I'm in Oxfordshire. I'm in Abingdon, which is a town south of Oxford. So we've lived here for a while, and I've worked in Oxford for the majority of my publishing life so far.
Okay. Did you ever work for Oxford University Press? I guess not your thing.
No, they're a big employer around here, and I certainly know people who work for them, and I've applied in the past. But I used to work for Taylor and Francis, who are a comparably sized academic publisher, though not quite as lauded or as ancient as OUP, obviously.
Okay. We're getting some questions here already as about the format.
Okay.
What we're going to do is we're going to just start off with a little bit of a broad chat, and I probably won't be looking at the comments too much, but probably a few minutes in, if you have any specific questions in reaction to that, throw them. I'll try field as many of these questions as we can. All right. It's a new experience for all of us, but away we go. John, first of all, can you tell us? We've already dipped into it, but a bit more about your experience as in publishing.
Okay. Yeah, so I've been in publishing now 20 something years, which is a bit alarming. I started in academic publishing way back in 2001, and for a small academic publisher called Gordon and Breach, who were then bought by a big academic publisher called Taylor and Francis, which is where I also met my wife. After 5 years of publishing exciting economic journals, I decided I really wanted to move on, and I've always been a science fiction reader, always been a fan. I write my own stuff as well, and I was perusing the Guardian job section when I saw an advert for a new editor wanted for a new line of high action adventure science fiction books, and I applied for a company in Oxfordshire, which is Rebellion, and together with Rebellion, I established their first fiction imprint, Abaddon Books. Rebellion are also the publisher of 2000 AD, home of Judge Dredd, amongst many other characters. So I was also a graphic novels editor for a while for Rebellion, but I was with Rebellion for 13 years, and there we established Abaddon Books, which was a line of shared world science fiction, fantasy, and horror adventure novels. It was a work for hire model, so it's quite unusual. But then in 2009, we bought Solaris from Games Workshop, which was a more traditional publishing body in that it was all author owned. And we inherited such great authors as James Lovegrove, Gail Z. Martin, and so I was in charge of doing those two lists, overseeing those two lists, which it was a small team, so we had to employ more people. But yes, I was commissioning books for Abaddon and Solaris for about 13 years. Extensive experience in every element of the editing process. As we were a small team, we were doing it all ourselves, bar writing the books, obviously, and drawing the covers. But we were pretty involved. After that, I went to work for a non-fiction publisher for 2 years, doing religious non-fiction, which was an interesting experience. And then I decided to finally go freelance, and that's been working out really well for me.
Yeah, and for you lucky people, that means John is available to work on your book should you get to that point. Yvonne, who's watching in the comments, she'll post a link to his profile. But yeah, fantastic. Just for the people who are kind of newer, may not be familiar with the traditional publishing process, by which we mean selling your book to a publishing, having it published and all that by a full team. Uh, if you're a new author, what can you expect the process to be like? If I've got a book, what do I do now?
Yes, there are various approaches. So in terms of traditional publishing, in terms of if you're looking to get your foot in the door of a publisher of hard copy books, of paperbacks and hardbacks, and you'd like to go that route, your best first bet is to get an agent. Most fiction publishers do not accept unsolicited manuscripts, by which I mean you can't just submit to them. They have a process. So solicited manuscripts are those that come through an agent. Now, finding an agent can be tricky, and it's important to find one that works for you. It's important to remember when you're finding an agent that you employ them, and it's got to be a good relationship. So if something's not working for you when you find an agent, you should feel empowered to suggest changes or change your agent. There are various genre agents out there. If you can Google them, and you'll see lists up there. Agents, like publishers, have huge piles of reading to do, so it can take a time to get a good agent. But one good way of going about it would be to identify a writer you admire, whose work you think is a good fit with yours, find out who their agent is, then see if that agent is accepting submissions. Now, the best way to do that is to go to their website, where they'll have details about how to submit to an agent. It's important when you submit to an agent to follow their submission process, because they will reject your manuscript most likely if it doesn't come up to the standard they are expecting it to arrive in. The same with publishers. There are some publishers that do open door submissions, and we're lucky in genre that there are several who do that. They tend to be the medium-sized indie publishers. So Angry Robot have an open door submission period sometimes. Last time I checked, it was about once every 1 or 2 years. Rebellion, who I used to work for, occasionally have calls for open submissions. So it's worth checking out the publishers' websites for the publishers you admire or where you think your book will be a good fit. But basically, look at, if you've got a book and you want to find a home for it, have a think about where your sort of book fits, where books that you admire of the same kind of type fit. Look at the publishers' websites, do some digging of what their submissions policy is, look at genre agents online, see if you can find a good one who's open to submissions. And that would be the way to get it into the traditional path of publishing.
So, sort of along that line, whenever we talk about any other type of publishing, we always mention like you got to know your genre. You have to know where your book is going to be shelved. I used to work at a bookshop, Blackwell's in Edinburgh. I still remember that the science fiction and fantasy was like enormous, and it felt like there was no organization in there beyond like a alphabetical order of the author. Like, does knowing your specific genre matter? And if so, like, is it important to know where your book belongs?
Well, genre publishers tend to be fairly wide in what they publish, in that, there are some who will be specifically looking for a specific thing, and Abaddon Books would be a good example of that. When I was working there, so we had a zombie series, we had a steampunk series, we had a post-apocalypse series. So it was quite clear what we were looking for. However, Solaris is much broader. In terms of that, I was looking for good genre fiction. And in terms of as a commissioning editor, it's like, well, what works for you? It's the quick answer is I'll know it when I see it. Obviously, I've got my personal tastes, and I have a commercial sensibility about when I think a book may succeed in the market. But often editors are looking to be surprised and delighted by fiction. When you find a good book, a manuscript you really like, it should be a sense of within a few pages, like, this author knows exactly what they're doing, and you can just relax and read it like you would a book for enjoyment, which is what the reader is going to do at the other end. So That's one way to look at it.
Okay, I might sort of touch back on that a little bit later. But in terms of the specific types, say of science fiction, your hard sci-fi and your space
Sure.
operas, are those distinctions existent and crucial, or actually are they a little bit more amorphous? I guess once it gets to
Yeah,
public
you
domain.
tend not to get the specific category on the back of a book. I've got some science fiction novels here. Here's one. That's by Adrian Tchaikovsky, Children of Time, Arthur C. Clarke award-winning book. It's fabulous. And on the back of it, it doesn't even say science fiction. It says fiction, which is interesting, but has space on the front cover, so you can tell it's science fiction. So when we put a category on the back of a book in Solaris, we tended not to break it down. We don't want to get it, make it too prescriptive. You want people to come to the book as wide as possible. So something like Europe at Dawn, one of our books from Solaris days by the excellent Dave Hutchinson, that had the symbol on it, science fiction, on the back. And it would go, like you say, alphabetically on the genre shelves. Um, there aren't the niche categories that are such good sellers that they become sections in their own right. So, for example, there was a period where steampunk was doing really well, but when we didn't really see in the bookshops that there was a specific steampunk section.
Hmm.
But as a reader, you know what sort of stuff you like, and if you like a certain type of thing, it's generally true that some publishers will do it more than others. So Bain Books, for example, are known as a publisher of sort of high action military SF, military fantasy, and they've got a certain look and a feel. So you'll find instinctively as a writer where your sort of tribe is and who seems to be publishing your sort of thing, if
Oh, I'm
that
going to
helps.
quickly answer this question. What other approaches are there in addition to traditional? I guess we're talking about self-publishing or indie publishing, depending
Mm,
on what you're
mm.
talking about. I guess as someone who works a lot with indie authors, like genre, yeah, especially when it comes down to genre fiction, knowing one's subgenre is really critical because Amazon, more so than your bricks and mortar store, than your Watersons and
Yeah,
Barnes and Noble,
absolutely.
shelve it in very specific places, and knowing where you're, knowing exactly what niche your book belongs to and whether it adheres to tropes is pretty critical. But I'm like, it's quite interesting to hear that that's less the case when it comes to TradPub.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. It's more the case when it comes to Amazon because they have algorithms and there's all sorts of strange subcategories on Amazon. And I've published books before and they've appeared in categories I'd never even thought of. So, um, in answer to the question, what other routes are there to the traditional? We've talked about self-publishing, and self-publishing is becoming more and more a phenomenon. Back when I started in publishing, back in the olden days, print on demand and self-publishing wasn't quite what it is now. Print on demand books, you could tell they were print on demand. They generally had the same harsh white paper stock. They felt like books that were print on demand, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
Now, with facilities like Lightning Source and Milton Keynes, and also Lightning Source have global facilities, you can produce a good looking book yourself if you know what you're doing and you have good design sensibilities and the sensibilities of how to put a book together. You can make it yourself. You have to sell it yourself, obviously, but the possibilities for self-publishing are so much bigger now. And obviously, with Amazon, um, there's been a huge boom in self-publishing, and some people have done very successfully out of it. That bear in mind, it's there are a lot of self-published authors out there, so you really have to, like you said, you have to dig down into more who you're aiming for and perhaps where your niche is, and really market to that readership. You have to be very savvy as a self-publisher because you are having to do everything yourself.
Yeah. Of course, if you're looking to go down the self-publishing route, Reedsy is here to help you. Quick plug. One of our founders, Ricardo, has written a book on how to market a book, which largely covers how an indie author can access their target readers. That Yvonne will definitely post a link to. Before we head to people's questions, I'm just going to answer one of the big questions we always get asked about word counts. Are word counts important to agents, commissioning editors? And if so, can you give us some ballpark figures?
Um, They are and they aren't, so that's a really good answer.
Okay, well,
No, no,
thanks.
no. Listen. No, yeah. Um, let's take fantasy as an example. Now we know that fantasy tends to be there tend to be bigger books. You can see on the shelves that fantasy books tend to be quite large. So the king of large fantasy books, apart from George, obviously, is Steve Erickson, who I'm a big fan of. They're fairly thick tomes. I think they average about 1,000 pages each. Yeah. Um, so fantasy, because of its epic nature, its often epic nature, has scope for telling big, long stories. So you tend to find publishers publishing quite big fantasy novels. That's not to say you don't get shorter fantasy books. For example, the excellent R.J. Barker's Assassin series. I think they're probably around 95,000 words or so. You can see from the thickness, it's not overly thick. Whereas someone like Stephen Erickson will be about 250,000 words, a quarter of a million words. So in terms of when I got fantasy manuscripts regularly, and I still do work on fantasy manuscripts regularly, the word counts I'm seeing are between, I'd say, about 130 up to 250,000. 250,000 tends to be the top, the really big ones. In terms of science fiction, you can get away with shorter, or you can you can have quite big science fiction books like Adrian's Children of Time. Um, you have slightly slimmer tones like Levita Dar's Unholy Land. I'd say on average, a science fiction novel when I was working at Solaris would be between 80,000 and maybe 120,000 words. Horror can be quite short. You tend to see quite short, punchy horror novels. If you think of a novel like Andrew Michael Hurley's novels like The Loney and Starvaker, I think Starvaker must only be about 60,000 words, and that's a new horror novel that's come out in the last year or so. So it does vary. Look at publishers and what they publish. I think if you are sending out a really big manuscript, it's absolutely essential you get it formatted correctly and as finished and polished as you possibly can, because it takes time to read. And if a commissioning editor has a huge 250,000 page, that would be immense, 250,000 word manuscript on their desk, they're going to be hoping that they're gripped within the first 20 pages if they're going to give it all that time. If not, it's likely going to be passed up. So it's
Okay, that sort
important.
of brings us on to our next question from Karen.
Ah,
What are your pet peeves when reading new manuscripts? You get one landing straight on your virtual desk. What's going to have you screaming or throwing it,
I
across the room?
suppose one of the things is if it's formatted badly, if there's no if everything say runs on as a big block of text and the author hasn't thought, oh, I should indent new paragraphs. I mean, just look inside a book. You know how you're a reader. You're all readers. Look how books are made and look at how language is used. You can usually tell Solaris's house style, so to speak, would be the first paragraph of a new section would be left aligned, subsequent paragraphs would be indented. So it's good when a manuscript is formatted well. It doesn't. I mean, I say pet peeve. I mean, my job is I work with new authors quite a lot, so I don't mind saying to new authors, "This is how you should do it," for future reference and help them out. But yeah, make sure it looks the part before you send it off.
Is there anything sort of on the writing side, like the way one might open the novel itself? Like, how are you on prologues?
I don't mind. I mean, there are people who say, "Oh, you should never use a prologue." I don't think there are hard and fast rules of writing. I mean, people say all sorts of things like you should avoid dreams and and all sorts of strange things. Um, when I'll be put off, I guess, sometimes by cliche and stereotypes, but then again, you can have novels that are quite traditional and quite old school stories that are jolly good fun. So it depends how well they're written. Um, when I start reading any book for pleasure, I want to be surprised and engaged. So um, I suppose stuff that puts me off is maybe stuff I've seen like 100 times before. I'm 43 now, so I've read quite a lot of books. And I've read science fiction professionally for almost half my life, so I think I've seen quite a lot. So yeah, it's avoiding, cliche and things like that can be important. But as I say, write with passion, write well, and engage me in your story.
Yeah, like a friend of mine who's a writer as well says, yeah, the only golden rule of writing is, do I give a damn? Like, you can
Yeah,
write whatever you
yeah.
want as long as the next thing you write is something I care about, and the thing after that, and the thing after that.
Yeah, even yeah, that's right. You need to engage with the characters, even if those characters are horrible, and the way you're engaging with those characters, like these people are awful. I hate them. That's not necessarily a bad thing. Look at Game of Thrones. There's virtually no sympathetic characters in that. In fact, they had to make Tyrion slightly more sympathetic in the series compared to the books, because he does some pretty awful things. So they're but make your characters engaging, make them real people. You can If characters just walk around spouting cliches, it can get a bit tired because you've seen that sort of stuff before. Make them believable people with, well-rounded, I suppose.
Have you seen Garth Marenghi's Dark Place?
I have, yeah.
I love it.
Yes.
Like the idea of the classic author insert of the main character is obviously the writer, and he is incredibly smart, incredibly handsome, and loved by all.
Yes, you do get the occasional manuscript where, yes, that character. My favorite Garth Marenghi quote is, "I know authors who use subtexts and they are cowards."
Oh, I'm going to jump about here. Here's a question from Elaine. Just a bit more insight. How much marketing help would a publisher give?
It very much varies. Now, a lot of publishers, and most publishers probably, will expect you to be engaged in it. That's not to say they're going to make sure you're ready to be on TV or ready to go on an international tour. Mostly because that's not going to happen because most authors don't get that. Um, in in terms of marketing, it can be difficult because the publishers have already spent their money, so they've paid you your advance, which they need to earn back for that book to make them money. So they have to get over that hurdle. So the more they spend at the front end, so they could spend tens of thousands at the front end of a book, but if they don't get that back, if that book doesn't earn back the money, that author is possibly not going to be with that publisher for a great deal of many books. So that's why you see, you know, established authors can be very visible, so like George R.R. Martin, you'll see posters for his new book on the underground, and how many new fancy authors do you see posters of for books of on the underground or the metro or wherever? Not many is the answer. So publishers, the best sort of marketing publishers like is cheap or free. Is the quick answer to that. Um, it, the thing is with marketing, and I speak from experiences, you can spend thousands on marketing, and sometimes it doesn't work. And if that's the case, that's not good news for anybody. But if you're savvy with marketing, if you can do it, I hate to use the word cheap, but if you're clever with how you do it and how you shout about a book, you don't need to spend money, and a book will be successful on that. So a good publisher will let you know what to expect and what sort of thing they expect. Publishers often, some publishers, when they sign you up, will send a kind of a detailed pack about the sort of things they expect from the author or the sort of things the author can do. Um, Publishers will certainly know which market they're trying to reach, and they will know the reviewers and bloggers and people they're trying to reach. They will certainly be interested in hearing from you about if you know any of book reviewers, bloggers, etc., that you want to target. So it should be a symbiotic relationship between publisher and author. Naturally, we'd all like to think we'd write a stunning book. A big publisher like Hachette will buy it. You'll be on TV. There'll be newspaper reviews everywhere. But that just it simply doesn't work. I published a book that we had the author on um, ABC in America. The author, was doing bookshop tours, etc. And then when we got the final figures, and they just weren't great. And I don't know, what did we do? He was on TV in America, and
Because back in
we
the
did
day
everything right.
when I was working at a bookshop, the idea of like a book marketing was they come to and talk to the bookseller and try to convince them to put it up near a point of sale.
Yeah,
It's all about
yeah.
placement in shops, I guess. Like for
So
TradPub,
the bit you don't see as a reader, and a bit that you probably don't see as a writer, is the part that when we sell books into the market, we go to these exciting things called sales meetings. They're super exciting, and they are usually at the distributors of said publishers' books, and they gather together the book buyers for every single region, and they each have a sheet, one sheet on the book that tells them what the book is, bit of bluff, why they should be excited about it, sort of book it's like, the sort of market, and you basically pitch them your book and you say, should do really well. Because so and so, and they might have questions like, well, there's a region I think this will do really well in the UK or the US. We talk to US, same process with US distributors as well. Bear in mind, those book buyers, those booksellers, have spent all day in meetings with all the other publishers in the country, doing exactly the same thing. So they're going through hundreds of books in that one day to figure out how they can sell them out to the market. So that can be an eye-opening process to be in. And certainly, I used to do sales meetings quite a lot until we got back when I was working in publishing full time before freelance. And when we got somebody who could be a dedicated sales rep, naturally I passed it on to them with great relief. But yeah, so a publisher will have a sales rep, and sometimes the bigger ones certainly will have a marketing department, and they will talk you. They will talk to you. Good publishers will talk to you about all this
hmm,
once they've accepted your manuscript.
okay, cool. I'm going to move on a little bit. We had a question earlier. I couldn't quite find it, but talking about comp titles. Uh, could you first
Mm,
quickly explain to us what a comp title is and whether
okay,
it is a commonly used
so
thing still?
comparable title. So that's exactly what's going to be on those one sheets in front of a book buyer at a sales meeting. It's this book. We think it will work because it's a bit like this. Now, many times during meetings, we were where we be pitching fancy books, or I see other publishers doing it. This is the next Game of Thrones. I mean, it might be, it might not be, but Game of Thrones is a quick kind of, this is the sort of thing we're aiming for in terms of sales and profile. We think this guy could be the next person. So it's trying to see how it fits into the current market. So when I send out book reports, when I do development edits or manuscript assessments, I include comparable titles to give the author an idea of where their book stands at the moment. I also try to do older comparable titles. So, if your book strikes me a bit like Ursula Le Guin, I might say it's a bit like The Wizard of Earthsea, and here's some books being published now that it could also be a bit like. So you get a sense of breadth of where it
Yeah,
fits.
and so I guess like having a comp title that's something a little bit newer suggests that maybe
Mm.
there is still a market for this because you're not publishing in the 1950s.
It can be difficult because, yeah, I remember selling in a book which I absolutely adore, still one of the favorite books I published. And I said, well, I said to our team, this is a quirky, weird book set in a haunted hotel that's sort of about growing up, and it's sort of about families. And it is scary and creepy, but it's so heartwarming and gorgeous. We need something quirky for this cover. So, to work for a comic publisher, I chose a comic artist for the cover. And I thought, this is one of the best covers we've ever seen. And then we sat in the sales meeting, and one of the first things the book rep said was, "What's this?" What? Why? This is weird. Yes, that's it. It's weird and different. Nah, don't like that. So, sometimes you can misjudge a situation.
Yeah, someone in the comments mentioned earlier, like everyone's looking for same but a little bit different.
That's it. I mean, publishing isn't making sausages or making a quantifiable thing. I mean, when you do get those sausages, so to speak, when you do get those sellers, that's great. I mean, that can really hold up most of your business, or be a big linchpin of your business. But it's not. there's so much chance and so much involved that everybody wants to. Obviously, when we commission books and publish them, we want all of them to be equally successful and everybody to be amazed by them. But it's the field is just not like that. But I'd say everybody does it because they love it and they're passionate about it, regardless of how successful they get at it.
Hmm. But sometimes you just like paying the bills.
Yeah, there's sometimes, and some authors do write, for money, and there's nothing wrong with that at all.
Yeah, that's the literal pot boiler. Um, so a few things people have been asking about. I think specifically where you see trends going in a specific genre, but maybe
Hmm.
let's broaden this out and see, from your perspective as an editor and a publisher, and with the people you know through conventions and whatnot. Any sort of trends we might be looking at in science fiction and fantasy over the next coming year?
I don't know whether there were. I don't know whether it's a trend as such, but it's good that science fiction is opening up to a wider audience, looking at more, own voices and writers of different nationalities. It's becoming a more diverse field, which is great, and we were seeing that. We've seen that definitely at Solaris, and it was something I looked for. In terms of trends, it's difficult to predict a trend. I mean, you'll notice that when a solid trend does get going, people tend to publishers can jump on it quite quickly. So, for example, when Twilight came out, there were a lot of Twilight-esque YA books out there. The problem with trends is you can play them, you can't predict when they're going to finish.
Mm,
So, trend, and bear in mind, most publishers are commissioning books 1 to 2 years in advance, so they're taking a punt on what will be desirable in the future. Um, Generally, I'd say in science fiction, space tends to be quite big still, which is good. I mean, the reinvigorated interest in Mars and travel within our solar system seeming more and more possible every year. You see authors like Kim Stanley Robinson exploring such things with Red Moon as Mars colonization and the politics of that. So hard SF within our solar system seems to still be a thing, and it's an interesting area. Um, and space opera is pretty solid in science fiction. It has been forever, really. Um, yeah, trends in trends in fantasy. Fantasy's um, deals with tropes and stereotypes and traditions, so it's quite it's it would be quite hard to see where fantasy would go beyond a medieval setting. But what I
mm,
am seeing in fantasy is um, fantasy. There's been a big discussion about cultural appropriation in genre fiction, and it's good to see that in fantasy we're seeing again authors who are of cultures they're writing about bringing those elements into a fantastical setting. I was trying to think of some. So Zen Cho, for example, is a good writer to follow. Sylvia Moreno Garcia writes great sort of horror novels and fantasy about Mexico. Um, I mean, but yeah, it is a fool's game trying to predict a trend, to be
mm.
honest. Uh, and you could put a lot of money into trying to do that and lose it really quickly.
So Melinda here has asked a question. A bunch of people have been asking about YA fantasy, which I imagine must be a pretty broad category.
Mm.
Have you heard? She said, "I keep hearing that the YA fantasy market is glutted. Is it likely we can break in?"
From experience, it's a difficult market to break into. We at Solaris, we started to do YA. We were having this buzz around book fairs like YA is the next big thing, YA is the next big thing.
Oh,
And
just to
my
interrupt, for YA is young adult, so that's
sorry,
books
yes,
aimed
young
at 12 to 18 or something, maybe.
pretty much. And whenever anybody says this thing is the next big thing, my sense is as a commercial publisher at the time was to approach it cautiously rather than going, yes, it's the next big thing. We will publish 24 books and spend tens of thousands of pounds setting up a YA list, which, some people did, and it turned out not to be, not really. It wasn't that it wasn't the next big thing or it wasn't a significant portion of the market. It's just hard to get into from the outside. But I am seeing good fantasy YA. And I've seen some really compelling fantasy YA recently, that you know uh, that deals with folklore and interesting things like that, and takes. I've seen a couple of novels that are set in our world, but then a fantasy world starts to bleed in. So you've got the mix of real folklore, so to speak, and fantastical folklore meeting. And I'm quite a sucker for kind of uh, folklore well explored in a kind of fantasy setting. It's it is tricky, but I think if you feel that if you know as a writer that what you're passionate about, and if you feel passionate about it, don't let it put you off, because if you love your book and you want your book to succeed, go for it. It's have a go.
I'm struggling to find the exact questions that someone brought up, but it's been mentioned a couple of times about writing in series. I imagine lots of
Mm,
genre authors, the ones we see here on Reedsy for sure, whenever, most of not saying most of the time, but very often, they will come and they'll have a series in mind, a four-part
mm,
series, whether it's fantasy or science fiction. If I'm a writer and I have a series in mind, and maybe have started writing a bunch of them, maybe thinking of splitting them up. Like, what should my approach be if I'm looking to query an agent and get it published? Am I looking at the one, or should I be coming to you, my full vision?
I would make sure that at least one exists already before you start querying. So I'd get one of them finished, preferably the first one, and get it up to the best standard you can. Um, yes, there are a lot of genre books around in a series. The thing is that publishers 2 to 3 book deals, at least from my perspective as a middle, kind of medium publisher with Solaris, 2 to 3 book deals are expensive. So if you're going to spend a lot of money and immediately buy 3 books, you're going to hope they're going to make their money back. Whereas some publishers are like, I like the idea of this series, but let's publish the first one, option the next two, which means they may do it, they give you some money for it, and they say, we want to do it. If the winds of fate flow our way, we will do these next 2 books. But you know, depending on the sales of the first book.
Hmm.
So examples of kind of where things have started as one and then continued. In my experience at Solaris, we started with a science fiction series called the Fractured Europe series by Dave Hutchinson, which is set in a near future Europe that is fractured into lots of micro states. Imagine that. And it also involves a parallel world. And we got the first novel, and it's brilliant because Dave Hutchinson's a brilliant writer. And then Brexit started happening, started becoming a thing, and it was like, wow, this book is actually really relevant, and it's actually selling quite a lot. So let's. And he said, "Oh, we've got an idea for another one. Yes, good. Let's do another one." And then that ended up as 4 books. Just a fantastically brilliant series. Whereas, so we didn't plan for that to immediately be 4 books. We played the game well as it was happening. Whereas something like Yoon Ha Lee's Machineries of Empire series, I got super excited the first time I read it, because I was like, this is just space opera, and it's space opera with a love of hard maths, but I'm a maths, I'm dense when it comes to maths, but I could understand it, and it was gorgeous, and it has gender fluid characters, and it's got huge space battles, and it's good fun. And I said to Yoon's agent, "This is great. We'd really like to have this, please." They said, and news agent said, "Oh, it's planned as a trilogy." Like, and Yoon's written book 2, so I said, "Yes, send me book 2. I'll have a look at book 2." Read it, brilliant, obviously. So I said to the boss, "We need to buy these 3 books. We need to commit to these because they're so good. We want them first. Trust me." And as a commissioning editor, you have to convince the purse holders, the powers that be, that is worth doing. And in this sense, they saw my enthusiasm for the book. They trusted me, and they said, "Yes, let's buy all 3." And it went really well. We did 3 books of Machineries of Empire plus a book of Hex Arcade stories. And I believe Yoon's new series came out fairly recently. I proofed it, and it's brilliant again because it's Yoon. from Rebellion. So those are two examples of how it works. You do occasionally hear of multiple book series being signed up. It's rare for new writers, for new names. I think it was is it Peter F. Alistair Reynolds got a big £1 million multi-book deal about, I want to say 15 years ago. I might be wrong about that. That's rare.
But he was established by then, I assume.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. But obviously, there's a lot of them in genres, and a lot of people who write complex worlds and really fall in love with their worlds want to keep telling those stories. So it's worth telling an agent when you're pitching a book, here are my ideas, without going into too much depth, because the agent wants to read the first book and really love it. They don't necessarily want to read the next 100 years of history of the series, but to give them some idea of what they can expect, to see if it does have legs, and if the first book sells really well, what they can play with.
Yeah, crucially, the one thing they probably don't want to hear is, "Don't worry, this will all make sense in book three." Because if book three never happens, they don't have to want to wait until then. Like, you need
I,
your
I
first book to function.
I have published a fantasy series I really, really believed in, and I still believe in it. It's fantastic books, and it did middling sales from the beginning, and we had to wrap it up by, I think, book 3. But both I and the author were like, if there's anything that has 7-book potential, this is it. But I'm not going to pay you for 7 books right now because we don't have the money. But I did say to the author, I want something. After he delivered the first one, I want something epic. I want something enduring, like Malazan, like the Erikson novels. And it's just hard to do that. It's hard to do that. And, I think Erikson is one of those writers. The reason that Erikson and Esselmont series work so well is they've got such a consistency of vision, and they're so in control of their world. It doesn't feel like, you get to book 4 and you think, oh, they don't know what they're doing. You think they know at least the next 15 books by that point.
I think that's where like self-publishing sometimes comes into its own. We do
Mm,
see
mm.
a lot of genre authors, and the ones who thrive and actually can make a living of it are the ones who write a series and can do it in fairly quick
Yeah,
succession.
absolutely, absolutely. I just edited a fantasy trilogy series recently. They were all quite short. They're about 80,000 words. I loved it. It was so much fun. And he self-published author. I'm like, this is perfect for that. If you know what you're doing as a self-published author, if you're putting out regular books in a series that are consistently good, it can really work. And when I was working at Rebellion, there was one self-published author duo we approached because our boss really liked the zombie novels they were producing, and we took a look at them and thought, yeah, these good, these got legs. And we said to them, come join us, we'll give you money and we'll publish them traditionally. And they said, actually, we can make this money ourselves and still own everything, so we'll do that. And we're like, oh, fair enough.
Yeah. I'm just going to move on. Just a couple of sort of technical questions. William Kaufman asks, "What do you think of ebooks versus hard copy? From what you've seen as a publisher, is there sort of a definite split?"
Hey, Bill, good to I know Bill a bit.
Oh.
He's a client, a lovely guy. I You do now get more e-first publishers, and some of the bigger publishers are starting e-first imprints, which I think is a good thing. It allows for more flexibility. It allows for more risk taking with the sort of stories you're publishing. Um, I do occasional freelance for a publisher who are e-first publisher, but they do paperbacks on demand, and that can be a really good route for small publishers because some people want the book. For example, some people buy an ebook and say, "Oh, that was so good, I now want a hard copy for my shelf." There are those customers out there. I personally, for pleasure, read the paper books because I've got like a hoarder, as you can see, of paper. Um, and I love physical copies, and I buy books all the time, which is a ridiculous habit because we've got finite space here. Um, but my wife has an e-reader. I've got many friends who have e-readers, and electronic books and audiobooks are becoming, they're on they're a significant part of the market. So if it's an e-only publisher, and I understand that some authors, when they're getting their book out there, will want to see a hard copy. Obviously, it's nice to see that book on the shelf. But e-first is is a potential route, a potentially good route, and it can reach a really wide audience. And if a publisher, an e-first publisher, knows their audience and knows and has that good marketing dialogue with you as an author and seems to know what they're doing, and you trust them, there's no reason not to go that route.
Yeah. When you're going down the indie route, like ebooks is pretty much your bread and butter. Like the cost of it is so low. Sending hard copies, there's like the additional cost of having covers designed with spines and
Mm,
backs and
mm,
the mechanicals there, and then the actual delivery cost.
exactly, exactly.
Yeah, certainly in indie publishing, ebooks are where you're going to go. But then again,
Yeah,
there are readers like you who do love having the hard copy, so having that
yeah.
available
I,
is always.
I speak from experience that warehousing can be cripplingly expensive, cripplingly expensive. And this was, we were publishing, we didn't do ebooks at first because I started before they were a significant thing. But I think what the publishing industry have avoided, which having seen the example of the music industry, when the e-revolution started, the music industry put its fingers in its ears and pretend it wasn't going to happen, and people lost a lot of money very quickly. So when ebooks came along, publishers were like, maybe this is a thing we should keep an eye on and take seriously and see how it goes. Um,
There's some
and
old guard people there going like, "It'll never. Books will be books will be books. It'll never change."
Yeah, obviously, I love paper books. I love secondhand bookshops. My idea of heaven is a weekend in Hay on Wye. So it's
We've
I'm
got
all for old books.
a specific sort of nuts and bolts question again. Can an American writer submit a manuscript to a UK publisher? How does it sort of work with
Yes,
agents and publishers?
absolutely, absolutely. Solaris continue, I think, to publish both American and UK authors, and we were publishing on both sides of the pond. We had a distributor in America and a distributor in the UK, and most, I think, I mean, it depends. With Solaris, we were doing it on both sides of the pond ourselves. You will get bigger, like Hachette, um, big publishers here in the UK who they will buy an edition for the UK market, and another publisher will buy an edition for a US market. But yes, there's no reason that a writer, a US writer, can't submit to a UK market. And I'd often get submissions from American agents. In fact, I think most of my submissions at Solaris were from US agents.
Okay, here's a sort of related one. Do editors mind if a writer doesn't 100% stick to formatting conventions? For example, she's in the UK where single quotes of dialogue is the norm, but she prefers double quotes.
Yeah, that's fine. As long as you're consistent, it's no problem. As long as it's consistent. If you use both types, that can be quite annoying. So
Yeah,
it's, so yeah, as long as you stick to a style and it's consistent, that's not a problem at all. The publishers will have their own house style anyway, on the whole. So when they get down to editing your manuscript, they'll be putting it into what format suits them.
yeah,
So as long as it's consistent, as long as it's legible and laid out well, that's fine.
yeah. But I guess once it goes to the publisher and they have their in-house style, you know, insisting on single quotes is probably not the hill you want to die on.
Yeah, I think, and where's my Solaris books? I think we did double quote marks in general in Solaris. That I think that comes from me. I think that was a personal preference that
Hmm.
when I started. Um, and there's some UK publishers. There's another UK publisher, Orbit, apparently use double quote marks. So it really
Yeah,
depends on the publisher. So
double quote marks I find are more common over here as well. Like I
yeah,
haven't
think
twigged
they
them.
tend to be. I want to say that literary novels are more likely to have singles, but I
Oh.
might be wrong about that.
We've got a question here from Sam. Should an author be thinking past the books, merchandising, movie and TV rights, etc.?
It's when you sell a book, it's definitely worth thinking about those sort of things. It's not worth saying to an agent, here's space novel. I'm thinking 5 years time, space novel, the movie, space novel, the theme park, space novel, the novelty pants, etc. So you can put yourself on a bit of a hiding to nothing there, but absolutely. And an agent will be very interested in controlling your rights for you or helping you control your rights. And the more rights you can sell, the more money you'll make, technically.
Hmm.
Now, lots of UK But the big UK publishers will only be interested, well, will be interested in buying the publishing rights because they're a publisher, and they might want to buy your movie rights too. It if you're dealing with them directly, it comes down to a personal thing. Most agents are going to say you want to keep all the subsidiary rights yourself, and that's pretty good advice on the whole, because if a company then comes to the agent and says, we loved Spacebook, we want to make Spacebook the movie, they can come to your agent and your agent can negotiate for you and you can get a bigger bite of the pie. If you've sold the rights to a publisher, you'll have likely sold them for a percentage that's fairly standard for them, so you will get that standard percentage of returns on the movie.
Yeah.
So
It's not like you
yeah,
sell the rights to the publisher and that's the last money you'll ever see. You'll still get money going forward if it goes through to production, but maybe not as much.
yeah, absolutely. As long as it's not a work for hire model, in which what I mean for work for hire is you may be hired to write a piece and that piece will be sold entire to the publisher. They will buy the copyright in the piece, is what I'm saying. So
Mm.
they will own not only the physical book, they will own the whole manuscript. They can do what they like with it. They can make it into video games and t-shirts and what have you. There's not a lot of work for hire publishers in the UK currently. There are some. I have worked for one. So it depends what you're happy to do there. But yeah, secondary rights are well worth considering when you get to that stage. But I wouldn't start out thinking this is going to be a great movie and I'm going to tell the agent and publisher exactly why it's going to be a great movie. Have
Mm.
it in the back of your mind for sure, and if it comes up, then you've got something to go with. But
Okay.
the agent's going to be interested in the novel first and foremost.
All right, we're gonna hopefully we're gonna aim to cut this off at the hour. So if you have any more questions, throw them in. We'll try to get through these quickly, sort of a quick fire round now. Bonnie asks, "What are the chances of an already self-published series being picked up by a traditional publisher?"
It happens. I was thinking of this just 10 minutes before we came on air, actually. So Hugh Howey, who wrote Wool, it was self-published originally, or indie published, and it was picked up by a trad publisher and became a very big thing. It happens. E.L. James, 50 Shades of Grey, was self-published Twilight fan fiction originally. So it can happen. I would say if you're going to go the self-publishing route, what I said about making sure you present your book well, you put it out in the nicest and most professional looking way you can, you market it well yourself. All those things are more likely to make you be picked up by a traditional publisher if you've done really well at the start there.
Uh, okay, Ian Young asks, "Can an author still be relevant if they're not present on social media?"
Absolutely. Oh, again, I've seen this discussion on Twitter this very day. Yes, when I was buying books, when I was commissioning books, I was commissioning them because I was excited by the story and I believed in the story and the writing first and foremost. Then we figure out how to make the marketing happen, etc. Some authors are really good on social media. Some authors are not so good on social media, and that's fine. It shouldn't be the be all and end all. And absolutely, I've worked with authors who do not touch the socials, and that's fine.
Uh, Elaine again, "How do you know when your book is done or over edited?"
Over edited.
That's your
when
fault.
it's when it's considerably shorter. um, um, how do you know when your book is done? I mean, it's that thing about pieces of art. You don't finish them; you just walk away from them, don't you? It's hard, and yeah, definitely. And I understand that as a writer, I've sent stuff out and then thought, oh God, I should have tweaked that just before. And you could keep doing that. You could keep going that as a writer. When it was a book over edited, that's an interesting question. And that's one you have to bring up with your editor. When I send out edits, they are all tracked. So they are suggestions. I mean, they're very informed and professional suggestions,
Yeah,
and they're probably right. but
but I guess,
they are suggestions.
but your publisher, I guess, can see if you've gone through the document and gone reject, 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 reject all the way down.
Yeah, at the end of the day, as long as you've both got something you can agree on, that's fine. It's not my name on the front cover of the book.
Got a question here from Elora. "Is there a minimum age for authors that publishers are willing to accept?"
I don't think so, really. I mean, my authors from Solaris days, some of them were in their 20s, probably not the majority. If you've got a good book and you've done something well, age shouldn't be a boundary. I mean, there are obviously legal issues whether you are under guardianship of your parents and you're sending things to publishers because there'll be documents to sign and things like that. But honestly, it's not the first thing I think of when I'm looking at a manuscript.
Yeah, I guess yeah. You're not probably thinking this is pretty good for a kid. Like if it's good, it's good. If it's not, it's not.
Yeah,
Bill asks, how's the growth of audiobooks changed the
hugely.
market?
Yeah, hugely. It's been very significant. It took a while to start becoming significant, but once it became a significant chunk of the market, most publishers will now be looking at acquiring audio rights. I know when I left Solaris, that was a pretty standard thing, is we'd quite like the audio rights. There are various audio publishers. There isn't just Audible, believe it or not, but Audible are the biggest game in town, and often it's the path of least resistance for publishers. It's not the most lucrative path for publishers, I must say.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, audiobooks are huge, and they're a big market. They make books more accessible, which is fantastic. And I've got friends and family who listen to books rather than read them. I don't, because I'm old and I read paper.
Yeah, I've always got like two books on the go, one on the audio and the other one, um,
Yeah,
on the Kindle.
absolutely. I know people who do that. Yeah.
Although, like, I'm dangerously having to stop one because, like, I'm in lockdown. I don't walk anywhere anymore. So audiobooks have started becoming what I fall asleep to. And as soon as I've lost the pace in that, it's like
Yeah,
I have
there
to
is
go back.
that.
Malcolm says, never judge a book by its cover. But how much does a cover help sales?
A good cover is pretty much essential, and this especially pertains if you're a self-published author. I would encourage you to either spend money on the book cover, get a professional designer, or really think about the design of the book. Have a look, because I mean, we've all seen those websites where it's like, here's the top 20 worst fantasy covers. It's kind of, you often see the odd self-published thing in there. But I mean, I'm working with self-published and indie authors all the time who are really thinking about it, and there's some just beautiful covers out there. And Malcolm, actually, who's an author I've worked with, he chose our old head of design at Rebellion to do his cover, and it's fantastic, and he did really well there. So yeah, you say you don't judge a book by its cover, you bloody do.
Yeah, yeah, that's the one thing we've learned. We did a test where we got three or four independently published books where they did a DIY cover. We got our designers to basically rework it based on what they sort of understood of how it works. So it looks better and fits more
Mm,
within the
mm.
trend, and especially when you're publishing online, like, and we're talking about having those very specific categories and niches. You kind of want to stick out, but not too much. And we found that
Yeah.
it improved clicks on the book by like 50, 60, 70%, which ultimately will convert into something, you know.
Yeah, also worth thinking about if you're self-publishing, and especially if you're mainly publishing to an electronic market, is that your book cover is going to be on a screen and quite small. So it's worth thinking about what that does to the image.
Okay, I'm going to do one more, I think, just to sort of wrap up our talk on. And we'll go back to a traditional publishing question. How much input do authors have in the publishing process? I guess once it's picked
Okay.
up through the editorial stuff and, how it's designed, how it's marketed, and all that.
I like to think that they had a lot of input when we were at Solaris, and I'm sure they probably still do. I mean, good friends with the people who run Solaris. Yeah, we obviously, the publishers will usually keep in contact with the author every stage, and let them know what's going on. In terms of cover design, I always got input from the author first and foremost. There were occasions where my instinct about the cover had to be not imposed, that sounds terrible, but I had to explain why I felt that commercially and from what our distributors had said, this is the way we're going. Not often, most of the time, authors were very happy with their covers, and and they still do have a fantastic design team at Solaris. So that really helps. But yeah, you should find that your journey is well communicated, and that if you are not certain about anything, you should certainly not be afraid to ask questions.
Great. All right. I think that's a good place to end. We're going to have just a little bit of housekeeping. If you're still here, can you give us one more round of likes if you haven't liked us already? John, of course, is an editor available to work on your book here at Reedsy. Just find him at reedsy.com/John Oliver, no H. And yeah, you can see the books he's worked on and send him a request. So that means basically pitching your book or sort of telling him what your book's about, where it's at, and then you'll get a quote for the services you require. John, are there any sorts of projects or types of books you're looking to work on at this point?
I mean, science fiction, fantasy, and horror is my bread and butter, so I'm happy to keep getting sent those. It would be lovely to see a bit more science fiction, but I'm a old school horror geek, so I read a lot of horror for fun. And the book what I wrote is horror, so it would be nice to see some more horror on my list. But yeah, I'm happy in any genre water really.
Cool. Well, we haven't really covered much horror, so we may have to have you back on at some point to
Yeah,
talk about that.
special
If we,
spooky edition.
maybe for Halloween, just to we'll keep making these webinars more and more niche until we're down to a select group of 20 people tuning in. But thank you so much. Thank you, folks
Pleasure.
at home. I'm going to send around a thing in a few days that will sort of have the replay for this and also solidify some of the points John mentioned. So if you didn't take any notes, no worries about that. Of course, subscribe to us here at the Reedsy YouTube channel. We have new content twice a week, plus these webinars every other week. I really appreciate you joining us. Thank you, John. I'll
Thank
catch
you.
you at home very soon.